Hello, my name is Sharzat Morgan. I have a website called thetreasurewithincoaching.com because there's a treasure inside all of us. It's not out there, it's not found in another person or in more money or a new job. The treasure is inside of us already. Kind of a spiritual concept. I'm going to be making a few videos about this book, Intimacy Anorexia, and I'll put them in the playlist. So this is just going to be the first video. What is intimacy anorexia? So here's a checklist on the back of the book. Do you or your spouse exhibit 5 or more of the following symptoms? Oh, before we start, in the back, that is a print of the clitoris. The clitoris is the female equivalent of the penis. It's 4 inches long. It's as big as a penis, except it's internal in the vulva. Beautiful. A diagram to remind us all that it's huge. It's not just the little glands that so many people think it is. But let's go on. Here are some questions. Now see if you can answer yes to 5 of these. Then you have intimacy anorexia. You or your spouse staying so busy that you have little time for your spouse. When issues come up, your first reflex or response is to blame your spouse. Withholding love from your spouse. Withholding praise from your spouse. Withholding sex from your spouse, or not being present during sex. Withholding spiritual connection from your spouse. Unwilling or unable to share your authentic feelings with your spouse. Using anger or silence to control your spouse. Having ongoing or ungrounded criticism toward your spouse. Controlling or shaming your spouse regarding money or spending. This book is written by Douglas Weiss, Ph.D., an author, speaker, and licensed psychologist who has been on many shows, including Dr. Phil, The Oprah Winfrey Show, The Doctors, Good Morning America. He has written dozens of books on marriage, self-help, and sexual healing. He's the executive director of Heart to Heart Counseling Center, and this book was actually written in 2010. Remember, Dr. Phil was still on the air then, but I still think that this book is very useful today. It's also, you could also maybe use the word that we use now is called avoidant, intimacy avoidant. Now, how he came up with this is very interesting, so I want to explain it to you. So he was treating sexual addiction, and he was meeting with some of the other leaders in his field in the late 90s. And it was kind of a new time of treating sex addicts professionally. And they had all noticed a particular type of client that they couldn't figure out. It was usually a male sexual addict who was habitually looking at porn or having sex outside of his marriage, like a habitual cheater. And they noticed that often this client was not having sex with his wife for weeks, months, or years. And these were clients who were in recovery already for months or a year or more. And it didn't make any sense. Isn't this guy wanting sex? So over time, it became clear that this dynamic had a lot more to do with avoiding intimacy than it had to do with avoiding sex. Now, much later in my career of treating intimacy anorexics, statistics show that very few men and only some women avoid sex altogether. However, there were both male and female clients actually avoiding intimacy, sexual, emotional, and spiritual intimacy. Okay? That's why they don't want to have sex. A lot of people don't want to have sex because of the intimacy. Of course, I think also some people were sexually abused as children and they repressed it or they haven't repressed it, and so a lot of emotional and physical pain can come up, but they don't want to deal with it, so they're withholding intimacy also. If people are withholding intimacy in their marriage and one person brings it up but the partner doesn't want to change it, there's a huge problem because you can't make someone open up. And I was married to someone who was not as extreme as this, but definitely intimacy avoidant. That is why I divorced him. He was intimacy avoidant. So I was very interested in this book because I thought, well, maybe I can learn something more about it. So he defines intimacy anorexia as the active withholding of emotional, spiritual, and sexual intimacy from the spouse. Now, why do we say active? Because some people say, well, I'm not actively doing anything. I'm just not interested in connecting. I'm just busy, nothing active about it. The avoidant person, and I might use the word avoidant actually, they claim no intentionality for these behaviors. But actually there is a choice. They're choosing to be distant. They're choosing to create pain for the spouse with the byproduct for the intimacy anorexic of making themselves safe, distant, or in control. They're choosing that. They're choosing that. So, Stephanie, a spouse, says, my husband actively sets out to create situations to avoid being close to me intimately. Nancy, a spouse, says, he would rather do anything than spend time with me. I know a woman once who said that to her husband at a party, wherever I am, you're not. He was definitely an avoidant. He was also an alcoholic. He was definitely avoidant. And she adored him. So withholding, what's the withholding part? Because we said active withholding. Withholding, it means I have a great heart to give, but I'm not going to come out and play with you and risk getting hurt. So I will put you in pain by withholding my heart from you. Now, the intimacy anorexic will be very gregarious with their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues, maybe their children, but not with the spouse, because the one place you're required to be the most intimate, where your triggers will come up, your intimacy issues will come up, is in a relationship with your spouse, with your partner. And that's the beauty of being in a relationship, because there's no other opportunity in life to experience some of these like deeper parts of ourselves that we can hide from everyone. Like, I'm not required to be intimate with anyone at all. When I say hi to people at the gym, that's not intimacy. That's very superficial. All right, let's continue. Trent, the spouse, says, withholding is not initiating any intimacy at all. That's an avoidance. If someone never initiates affection, never initiates praise, they're avoidant. I would say that maybe they were raised that way, but if you bring it up and they don't want to change it, there's a huge problem. And that is why I believe so many people get divorced. I think it's Adam Lane Smith who says that. He's a therapist for couples. That the majority of divorces are caused by men who are emotionally tuned out, emotionally avoidant, emotionally unavailable. But it can be women too. Now let's talk about the three ways that people withhold. We said emotional, spiritual, and sexual intimacy. So emotional withholding, okay, let's talk about that. Humans have emotions, okay? But most of us grow up with very little role modeling or training about identifying our feelings, communicating our feelings, knowing what to do with our feelings. And the author says, even though I have 4 academic degrees, none of these degree programs involve training on how to identify and communicate feelings. And also as adults, we know that in the real world of relationships, pain is part of the relationship process. Pain is part of the relationship process. You're going to feel some pain. Emotional intimacy isn't, I connect, give myself, and receive you if you promise never to hurt me, see or mention my flaws, or disagree with me. That is how a toddler talks. This conditional intimacy and irrational belief for safety in intimacy anorexics will be discussed later in the book. Now here's a quote from Todd, who is an intimacy anorexic. Expressing emotions is being able to identify and verbalize what I am feeling when I feel it, and hearing my wife describe what she is feeling when she feels it. Here is Titus, a spouse, saying, emotional intimacy is when 2 people are connected spiritually and emotionally to each other in such a way that there is safety when you are with that person. You feel safe and secure with them and can talk about anything without being afraid of how the other will respond. I just want to pause here for a moment because I've had examples, these female friends I talked about in my last video, there wasn't any safety because I knew they wouldn't be able to handle a very simple thing of me saying, I'm going to be 10 minutes late, or I don't like when your dog sniffs my crotch. All hell breaks loose. So they are unable to be emotionally intimate because they can't handle it. And I kind of know that they can't handle it, which makes me reluctant to say things, and those are not safe relationships. I will never get in a relationship like that ever, ever, ever again, where I feel like if I express something that I need or want or have to say, if I feel like that person can't handle it, I won't be with that person anymore. That's something I only learned in my 60s, you guys. Okay, now what's spiritual intimacy? Spiritual intimacy means that giving a spiritual part of ourselves to our spouse, whatever that spiritual is for you. I need to change my lighting. Now let's talk about sexual intimacy, because that's the place where my ex-husband, despite him being a masculine man in all other ways, was severely avoidant, and that is why I left him. Okay. Sexuality is far more than an act. It is a part of who we are. Intimacy anorexics can either deny they're sexual, so they don't want to have sex at all, or engage as little of themselves as possible in the act of sexuality. The majority of male and female intimacy anorexics don't mind the act of sex. It's the giving of their heart or connecting during sex that is scary. The intimacy anorexic would say that they'll give you their body, but not their soul or spirit during sex. A small number of intimacy anorexics will have nothing to do with sex. They avoid sex by shutting themselves down. Over time, they intentionally starve or punish their spouse through a sexless marriage at the cost of their spouse's happiness. This desire to be unknown is intentional. It says, I won't let you in. No way. No how. No matter what pain I intentionally inflict in your whole being, and too bad for you. Oh my God, that's exactly how my ex-husband felt. if he could put it into words, he would say, that's me. I won't let you in, no way, no how, no matter what pain I intentionally inflict in your whole being, and too bad for you. Because, hey, I don't have a problem. I'm fine. You have a problem. I don't. That's your problem. This is just how I am. It's just how I am. It's just how I am. These, but this paragraph though was about people who don't want to have sex at all. In my case, there was sex, but it was one-dimensional physical sex. One-dimensional physical sex over time can be unsatisfying for the spouse and an unattractive proposition altogether. For some intimacy anorexics, they negatively reinforce sex, so their spouse doesn't want to be sexual with them. Sexual withholding or sabotaging is sometimes a part of the intimacy anorexic pattern. Okay. Here is a quote from Rachel, the spouse of an intimacy anorexic. Sex should be a beautiful sharing, not the using of a sexual toilet. And an emotional sharing, not a biological functioning like urinating. Pat, a spouse, says, my husband prefers his mistresses, porn, masturbation, solo sex of all forms, fantasy, actual sex with others, sex with anyone besides me. He isn't with me. As he has admitted, he is not attracted to me, and he resorts to fantasy just to finish the deed with me. He hasn't wanted me in so long, and when he is with me, I worry he is not with me. I want him to want me and love me. I want to be desired, and I am not. All right. Let me see what else I want to share. Okay, so we're just defining all the terms in that definition. The active withholding of emotional, spiritual, and sexual intimacy from the spouse. So intimacy is the ability for me to let you behold me, flaws and all. And what the spouse part is important because the intimacy anorexic has no problem being gregarious with his friends, colleagues, neighbors, people at the club. He could even be a rabbi or a minister who everyone looks up to for his spiritual beliefs, but he will never pray with his wife. You will not see it on your social media. It's only the spouse that feels it, whether it's the man or the woman who's being withheld from. It's only the spouse that knows what's happening, that there's something missing, that there is not the connection that they need and want. And the reason for that is that the people who are emotionally avoidant or intimacy anorexic, they want to withhold long-term emotional, spiritual, and sexual intimacy. And that's something that marriage demands. Marriage demands your ability to be with someone long-term, over time, consistently over time. It requires you to stay connected with someone long-term over time. And many people are unable to do that. We all experience pain, rejection, anger, disappointment, and the whole gamut of emotions inside of marriage. So, hey, those of you who think that marriage is supposed to be easy, it's not always easy, okay? You're going to experience pain. You're going to experience rejection. You're going to experience anger and disappointment and all kinds of emotions, joy and pleasure and everything inside of a marriage. If you are an intimacy anorexic, you recoil from this type of pain within a relationship. You recoil. You're not able to handle it, so you start distancing yourself. Or maybe you were always a distancer, but when the relationship was new, it wasn't threatening to your, didn't feel threatening to your safety yet. The intimacy anorexic applies a variety of strategies to create or maintain distance in the relationship, and I think usually it's the man, because many men, unless they were born after 1990, were raised to not have feelings, and many young men may have been raised in homes where there was no father, or their father was that old-fashioned type where it's like, boys don't cry and you don't have feelings, and you learn that people are not safe, or maybe your mother was mean to you and you don't trust women, or men were mean to you and you don't trust men, so you don't feel safe, so you start withholding, and now you start withholding from your spouse, and you think that you're safe, but you're really carving the path to divorce. And I believe that's why most women are the ones that become dissatisfied in their marriage, because the husbands are unavailable emotionally and don't care. Like I said, that's your problem. I'm just fine over here behind my concrete wall of my heart. I'm just fine. I bring home the money. Stop complaining, lady. Distancing strategies. The distancing strategies allow the intimacy anorexic to feel safe, protected, and in control, unthreatened by genuine intimacy. The strategies differ from couple to couple. Over time, you see these strategies build a fortress between the intimacy anorexic and their spouse. The person who suffers the most is the spouse. The spouse can be a man or a woman who has written a huge check, quote unquote, to keep the marriage together. They have given up a lot to keep the marriage together throughout the years of being blamed and vilified and ignored. But when the intimacy anorexic accepts full responsibility for the withholding behaviors, this can dramatically change both of their lives. Now, what are some of the characteristics of intimacy avoiders? The first one is being busy. And out of the whole list, that's the only one I experienced. And that was the main one I experienced in my marriage, was busy. You're so busy you have little time for your spouse. And there are two kinds of busy. The first type is inside or around the house. And the second type of busy is outside the house. Okay? And being overly busy is a huge problem. It is a way to avoid being in the present moment. Okay, here are some examples of inside the house. Always doing housework, cleaning constantly, being very busy with children while excluding the other spouse, working on solar projects. For example, some intimacy anorexic couples buy and live in their fixer-uppers. They're constantly doing projects and have no time for each other. Then we have the readers. They bury themselves in the newspaper, the latest novel or self-help book, and they're writers who endlessly write instead of relating. There are also those who need so much sleep that they avoid connecting with their spouse. Now let's go into technology. And technology is a dream come true. The computer, the television. You may be involved on the computer in social networking, shopping, checking the weather, chat rooms, pornography, games, gambling, research. This can eat up many hours while your spouse is in the other room waiting to connect. Even you might watch TV together. You're here, she's there, you're not connected at all, and then you drift off tired into bed just to fall asleep. Or maybe you have a quickie, I don't know. Television is an intimacy avoider. It's called the intimacy zapper. Both people are in altered states, separate from each other, and when they do come back to reality, at least one person is too tired to talk. By the time they pry themselves off the furniture, it's time to go to bed. Computer and video games. Saving a false world from destruction, for example, is often more valuable than connecting to the one you said you would love, honor, and cherish. Now let's go to avoidance strategies. Busy, busy, busy outside the house. I'm just busy, 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 busy. These activities outside the house can be positive and easily justified. I have to work. I gotta work. I'm making money. By the way, I have noticed that men who want relationships, like say they have a job where they travel a lot, they'll say, I want a relationship, so I'm going to switch jobs. they won't work that much. Or I care about relationships, so I'm not going to do a job where I work long hours. That's what they'll say. So the job thing is definitely an excuse. It's an excuse, okay? They will quit that job if they value their family. That 80-hour-a-week job, making partner on Wall Street. They'll quit that job if they value their family, but a lot of them don't. It's an excuse. That way they can have a good reason to avoid their family life. Also, the person who volunteers, they're helping. They can justify their absence. The religious person is saving the world, but intentionally withholding from their spouse. The workaholic avoids intimacy while justifying their behavior through work to create more money or achieve goals. There's also the golfer or other sports participant or fan who is loyal to a team, but not loyal or intimate with their spouse. Busy can take many, 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 many forms. In my case, my ex-husband was busy doing house projects. That's what he wanted to do. Busy, 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 busy. He did a lot of other stuff, like he worked out and he read, and that was all great. But all those house projects, hours, all weekend long, always to Home Depot. So this example rings true for me. Stephanie, a spouse, says, as the spouse, I see how every spare moment my husband has away from his job is dedicated to being busy. Lawn and yard work, fishing, hunting, chopping wood, fixing everything, and gardening. Then when he comes in at night from these nonstop chores, he just collapses for the night on the couch watching TV. He could be doing things to improve himself or marriage or intimacy, but he always chooses to put us last. Well, my ex-husband wasn't like as bad as that. But he would avoid me in other ways, like if I wanted to go away for a weekend, he would insist we had to bring the kids. Using kids as intimacy avoidant. I don't want to be alone with you, so let's bring the kids. I don't want to go to dinner alone with you, let's invite another couple. I don't want to go to dinner with you, we don't have the money. But we do have the money to, do this thing on the house. I don't want to take a sexual tantra class with you. I'm just not interested in that. I need that money to do something on the house. These things always broke my heart, but I didn't know at the time that it was avoidant. I was just like, I got to figure out how to soothe the pain in my heart. This was like in the first year of marriage, and I stayed for another 24. But this is the only part where he was bad. In every other area, he was really good. He didn't do any of the stuff that I'm going to go into next. Which is why I stayed with him so long. He praised me. He thought I was beautiful. He thought I was a good mother. He liked listening to me. He thought I was really smart. So that's why I stayed with him that long. That was the one area that was painful for me, was that sexual intimacy part and the romantic part. Anyway, let me go into the other examples of characteristics of intimacy avoidance. So the first one is that they're busy. The second one is that they'll blame you. And you may not have all of these, but you may have some of these. The intimacy anorexic blames or puts responsibility on the spouse for any issue that comes up instead of acknowledging their contribution to the problem. Rachel, a spouse, says, he'll say I'm too fat, but I'm the same as when he met me. Or if life is going wrong, it is always the spouse's fault. They want to blame you. They don't want to take responsibility for anything. The third one is withholding love. The intimacy anorexic often has a difficult time perceiving the intangible nature of withholding love. Withholding love is to not give love to your spouse the way you know how to or how they have asked to be loved. And this will greatly affect your physical health. You think that you're a good person for staying, but staying when your heart is breaking and you're emotionally neglected like that is going to cause emotional distress, physical distress, and can cause physical ailments actually too, depending on how severe it is. The next one is withholding praise. That means you're not sharing with your spouse their positive qualities as a person and their positive impact in your life. The next one is withholding sex. It's the easiest to measure. It means avoiding sex, sabotaging sexual encounters, or not connecting emotionally during sex. I guess I had that one too. And so I'm going to read these, yeah. So I had the busy, but the busy goes into the sex because we can't have sex very long. It can only be 2 minutes because I'm busy. I have things to do. I have to get up and do things. But his mom was a busy too. I think he had mommy issues, actually. I think a lot of men have mommy issues, but thank God my sons do not, because I was actually a good, nourishing mother. Okay, so here are some examples of withholding during sex. During sex, do you look at your spouse, or do you close your eyes? Do you think of other things to do during sex? Or are you actually present with your partner? Do you fantasize about others or porn during sex? Do you communicate positively during sex? Are you silent during sex, like you make no sounds? Guys, if you make no sounds, you're withholding. What is wrong with you? Seriously, guys who make no sounds during sex or no sounds when they're picking up weights are very repressed. Do you act as if you dread sex? Do you hurry your spouse to get it over with? Probably some premature ejaculation guys there too. Do you leave your spouse emotionally or physically after sex? Do you shut your spouse down when talking about sex? Here's a good example from Nancy's spouse. He promised to take me out and spend an evening of romance and gets as far as pouring the wine, then goes over and spends 3 hours talking to a neighbor he's never talked to before. That one's pretty obvious. Here's another spouse, a woman, saying, sometimes weeks or months would go by without sex, and he was mostly blaming me for us not having sex. I was always ready because I figured I had to take what I could get. Okay, here's another one. My spouse has sex with me more out of responsibility than out of anything else. He tries to avoid any kind of meaningful connection. Okay, another characteristics of intimacy anorexics is withholding spirituality. This is only noticed by the spouse. The author writes, I have had clients that were spiritual leaders, pastors, rabbis, and medicine men that didn't connect spiritually with their own spouse. The next one has to do with feelings. Feelings, anorexics are unwilling or unable to share feelings with their spouse. If you're the spouse of an intimacy anorexic, you may have difficulty remembering a time that your husband or wife voluntarily shared feelings with you without having to write the emotional check for the experience. Criticism is the next one. Ungrounded criticism that is not based in reality, it's to create distance. Anger or silence treatment is another characteristics. Not all use silence or anger, but those who do use it with a vengeance. The use of anger or silence is used to push away, punish, or control the spouse. Money. This is the least common among intimacy anorexics. However, those that employ it use it with an iron fist. Those who use it to control or shame with money do so by keeping the spouse ignorant of their finances, giving their spouse an allowance, making the spouse ask for money, and not allowing the spouse to have a credit card or checkbook. There's another side of controlling through money as well, controlling through abundance. This spouse, either male or female, has substantial money, but controls with it. Their attitude is, I buy you everything, so don't complain about us lack of love, or intimacy, or sex. This type of controlling by money isn't as obvious as those that control by not giving money. Shaming the spouse about money can also be a part of this characteristic. So it's okay for the intimacy anorexic to spend money whatever they like, but the spouse has to account for everything or is put down even for legitimate purchases. So that wraps up the first 2 chapters of the book. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the causes of intimacy anorexia. Then we're going to talk about the patterns and the strategies and recovering strategies. In the end, it turns out to be a 12-step book. I'm not into the whole 12-step thing. I don't believe we're powerless over anything. I believe that we choose what we do. I don't think that we're powerless beings who have to every day look at our flaws and focus on our flaws and all this. But so I'm not going to read that part of the book at all. But I just thought this was very interesting so far. And this is why I'm doing this book in sections, because it's already 35 minutes and I'm only through the first 2 chapters. So those of you who enjoy my longer videos may have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back for the comments. I'm interested in knowing if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who was intimacy avoidant and what that was like for you, or if maybe you were once avoidant and no longer are. That's a difficult journey to overcome, to start to feel safe by opening to someone. Probably requires a little bit of therapy to get there. Thanks for watching.